Okay, I'm calling this George Webb, December 2016. And I've had several requests for sort of a Ken Burns kind of treatment to this. Hey, George, there's too many videos. Just give me a monthly treatment of the summary month by month. And I think there's been different serials that have been done, like baseball or the Civil War that Ken Burns has done. Those are the ones I think of, just to kind of say, okay, if I had to do a binge watch, give me season one, two, three, four, and so forth, and let me do it all in one weekend to catch up. So that's what this is about. This is the first installment. I remember Churchill writing Gathering Storm, his first book of the World War II, and then he went through the whole thing. Except I don't know how this war is going to turn out. But having said all that, I remember when I started this series, it was very much about Eric Braverman, and I had saw that he had made this run to the embassy, to this Soviet embassy, and I saw the things that he had been saying in the press, and he just looked very much like a man under surveillance. And I think people probably remember this John Podesta email. It's Eric Braverman that had been in March of 2015, and he'd been kind of under this intense surveillance that I don't even think he knew exactly where it was coming from. I don't think he knew at the time that it was the FBI, but we'll get those answers in time. But early on, most of the episodes, and you can still go out there and see the earlier episodes if you want to see. It was a lot of pay to play, the arms deals, and Zero Footprint, Timber Sycamore, and the key players that were a part of it. Andrew Shapiro at the State Department, Andrew Shapiro, Philippe Reines as kind of the key liaison to David Petraeus and Mike Morrell, and then the people doing the cover stories like Jeremy Bash, and also other directors of the CIA like Leon Panetta. And then the insiders, which really never kind of come to light, were this Tyler Drumheller and Sid Blumenthal. And as we see now with the latest Nunes, the Nunes FISA subpoenas are going to be coming. You're going to see all these same players coming back, all these people that use these separate Gmail accounts. So it's very relevant still. So if you want to go back and see those episodes, it's very relevant. We had a lot of ambassadors, Russian ambassadors, die. And we talked a lot about these Frank Justra mining partners, and talked a lot about gold and so forth in the early days. But all those discussions are never more relevant with Uranium One. They just basically show the whole kind of dirty tricks, Mike Morrell using poison gas, using ISIS to go get land, to go get mineral wealth, to go get oil, to go get gas wealth here in the Golan Heights with Genie Energy, et cetera. So it's basically just using ISIS as sort of an ISI, just add an S, and we'll use them all over the world to get our oil, gas, and mineral wealth, especially uranium. Very early on, I talked about the targeting of McCabe and how he had used surveillance pretty much as an extortion tool, as an economic extortion tool all over the world. Not initially just in the United States, but then as his career kept developing, using it all over the world. Of course, here's another dead ambassador. A lot of the Uranium One ambassadors ended up being dead. And of course, we talked about pay to play. Lockheed was a big part of that. And we definitely talked about Comey's attachment with Lockheed. Now, there's going to be some other ones mixed in here, but we talked about these oil deals with the Soviet Union around the polar ice cap and so forth. It just seemed to be oil was the key. Once you understood where the oil pipelines were, everything else seemed to make sense. Haiti was also, we not only talked about war, but we also talked about flood. Haiti, being in a natural disaster, or the category of natural disasters, also seemed to be a place where USAID would come pouring in to basically build the infrastructure for hotels, and even in some cases organ recovery, and for also potentially child trafficking, unfortunately. As we move through December here, moving up, we talked about some of the institutions that were fighting this. Judicial Watch was doing a lot of FOIA work, good work, but I could see even back then in December that the need for a more aggressive approach toward the Awan brothers and so forth. The Awans hadn't quite emerged yet, even though around this time the Awans were thinking about leaving for Pakistan. But we talked a lot about gold, and even as a front for uranium. Barrick Gold. We didn't have the concept of Barrick Gold at that time, but we talked about the gold front potentially down in uranium with Tony Tony Rodham's oil gold company. So I think if you go back, there's a few episodes here, the choice episodes. Comey at the HSBC being the key bank as the key laundering mechanism, and just all the use of any kind of weapons, chemical weapons, Stinger missiles, white phosphorus missiles, all kinds of depleted uranium, etc., murderer ambassador, anything to get the resources, using ISIS really as a way to get any kind of resources. Then we talked about, kind of importing those same folks into our country through this guy named Gulen and kind of setting up this whole network of kind of a drug launder and a money laundering network here in the United States. And finally, I would say that we talked a lot about NATO and pay to play and how anybody would be a partner in this metal business. This was the the Canadian Bouchard was the guy who helped us get the wealth in Libya and the wealth in Syria. But we talked about really all the nations of Europe being potential partners in this pay to play, and really kind of the Podesta Group being at the center of it, and this dirty trick squad that Mike Morrell, the ex-CIA director, and David Petraeus were very much a part of that. And we also talked about the DOJ cover-up, which is even more prevalent than it was at that time. So a lot of the things in this series in December we talked about were very, very prescient. We talked about this Eagle Vale oil deal, and we talked about how Fast and Furious kind of cleared the way for this nationalized oil deal, selling these oil leases off the Gulf of Mexico. The story really still hasn't broke yet. The Eagle Vale story still hasn't broke. So there's still some good stuff in December 2016, even though it was so far ago, because the stories have never come to light. People have never kind of put all those things together, and the Fast and Furious is kind of looked at as its own thing rather than a part of a scheme to sell Mexican Gulf oil leases. You needed you needed to break up the nationalized oil company of Mexico in order to do that, in order to sell those oil leases. Braverman and Brown are key architects, especially Neil Brown, of that story, and people just have forgotten that story. Here's Comey moving to Bridgewater, taking all the technology of the F-35, all the things that basically hang off of it, and then investing in it for this kind of group of NATO generals and Yankee foxtrotters, if you will. Talked about Tyler Drumheller and getting the plans for not only Libya, not only Syria, but then the plans for Sudan, the plans for Yemen, the plans for Iran, etc. And then finally, people got a sense of my defense of President Obama, with things being kind of thrown on his chalupas, kind of FISA's being dropped on his lap at the last minute by Alexandra Chalupa. And then also the money that we were spending on terrorism, basically going into security services, which were enabling these drug to arms, weapons, rat lines all over the world. And it's been that way for since probably 1993, but it's increasing. The spending on these defense forces or these security forces is just basically enabling and hardening the drug rat lines that we've developed. So we ended up at the month, turning the corner on the year, looking at Haiti, but the foretelling of DynCorp as being the root cause, DynCorp being at the root of the different scandals that we've suffered as a nation, going all the way back to Vietnam, then going through the different scandals we've had in the 80s in Central America, in the 90s with Iran-Contra, moving on to the development of ISIS and all the conflicts for obtaining resources that has led to.